He texted, "I'm done," and emptied our account. I produced receipts. His smile vanished. Cassie Morgan woke to the soft hum of morning light filtering through the blinds of her modest Atlanta apartment. She stretched, her mind already buzzing with thoughts of the day ahead. A routine workday at the small marketing firm where she'd been an administrative assistant for 3 years. It was a simple life, but one filled with quiet satisfaction. She poured herself a cup of coffee, glanced at her phone, and saw a message from Ryan. It was a simple good morning, like always, accompanied by a smiling emoji. She smiled faintly, though her chest tightened. Their relationship, which had spanned 3 years, had always seemed picture-perfect to outsiders. Ryan was charming, confident, the kind of man whose easy smile drew people in effortlessly. At work, friends often remarked on how lucky Cassie was to have him, and neighbors greeted her warmly whenever Ryan was around. But beneath that charismatic exterior, Cassie knew there was something else, something quieter, darker. In public, Ryan was attentive. Private moments often transformed into subtle put-downs and demands to explain her whereabouts or friends she'd been talking to. She had grown used to the anxious, sinking feeling when he'd dismiss her ideas or interrupt her in front of others, leaving her shrinking in her own skin. Just last night, at a friend's dinner party, she'd tried to share a recent promotion she had been aiming for, but Ryan had cut her off with a tight-lipped smile and a comment about how she should be grateful to have a stable job at all. Cassie had forced herself to laugh it off, nodding silently while catching the curious stares of others around the table. It was exhausting, but she didn't want to stir drama. One symbol of their unity in the eyes of those who admired them was the joint bank account they shared. Both contributed their salaries to this fund, which ostensibly paid for bills, groceries, and their weekend plans. To Cassie, it was a gesture of partnership. To Ryan, she suspected, it was more of a control mechanism, cleverly disguised with a smile. She'd noticed how he begrudged deadlines on payments she requested, or questioned the smallest purchases she made alone. Yet she was too timid to confront it directly. That afternoon, after a terse and awkward conversation over breakfast, Cassie sat at her desk at work, her phone resting beside her keyboard. Ryan's texts had gone from affectionate to curt. Then, just as she was finishing a report, a notification lit up her screen, a simple, chilling message from Ryan. "I'm done." The words hit her like an unexpected freeze. A cold wave swept over her, heart pounding in disbelief. Done? The word echoed in her mind. As if the ground beneath her was shifting without warning, she reread the message again, searching for a hidden meaning, a follow-up she hoped would explain the sudden finality, but there was nothing. Trying to steady herself, she dialed his number. The call went unanswered. Minutes felt like hours. When he finally picked up, his voice was distant, clipped, almost cold. Without explanation, he hung up. Cassie's fingers trembled as she opened their joint banking app, heart sinking further as she saw the balance. 0. Every dime she'd trusted him with, every hour she'd worked to contribute to their shared future, vanished. Panic rose like a fist in her throat when she checked for recent transactions. Her suspicions crystallized into a painful truth. Ryan had transferred all their money into another account, one she had no access to. A squall of emotions churned inside her, shock, betrayal, humiliation, as she sat frozen in her cubicle. Around her, co-workers chatted casually, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her. She felt suddenly exposed, vulnerable, trapped in a nightmare where the man she loved had discarded not only their relationship, but her financial security with a cruel text and a clean bank statement. The small world she'd built was crumbling, leaving her suspended on the edge, with no clear way forward. The hours after that devastating message blurred into a haze for Cassie. At work, she stayed glued to her desk, fumbling through spreadsheets, but her mind was elsewhere, haunted by Ryan's cold, "I'm done," and the sight of their empty bank account. She hesitated to tell anyone, fearing judgment or pity. After all, Their friends had always seen them as the perfect couple. Cassie felt like the center of a private storm no one could understand. When she finally confided in a close colleague during a break, hoping for some consolation, the response was far from comforting. "Are you sure you didn't mess something up? Maybe you spent something without remembering?" the colleague asked, eyes narrowed skeptically. The whispering started, subtle at first, quick glances in the hallway, hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached. Rumors began to weave their way through the office like wildfire. And to Cassie's growing horror, many turned the blame inward. How could she let this happen? Was she irresponsible? Did she know anything about money management? The whispers transformed from curiosity into judgment, making her isolation deeper than ever. Meanwhile, Ryan appeared unchanged, unbothered, and worse, smug. Whenever their paths crossed, his eyes glinted with a cruel sense of victory, his once familiar smile morphing into a mask of arrogance. At a weekend gathering organized by mutual friends, Cassie held her ground, though inside her world was cracking. Ryan approached, his tone patronizing. "You really thought I'd let things stay the same? You're way too naive," he said in a low voice, making sure those nearby could overhear. The humiliating sting wasn't merely his money grab. It was the way he exposed her for the vulnerable person everyone now whispered about. She felt the sting of betrayal as deeper wounds opened. Ryan wasn't just walking away from their relationship, he was gaslighting her, turning those around her into skeptics. Instead of offering support, close friends began to question her story, subtly implying she should have seen it coming, or that she'd failed to protect herself. The feeling of being judged by those she had trusted the most crushed her. Walls around her started to close in. Cassie remembered nights spent worrying about money, about bills, and about how Ryan seemed to dismiss her concerns with a wave and a careless smile. Now those fears had materialized into a tidal wave, threatening to drown her. The division between public admiration of their relationship and private reality couldn't have been wider. Yet, even in the thick of this storm, a whisper inside her pushed back. She couldn't let this be the end. No matter how every glance, every whispered word seemed to lock her into a cage of shame, she had to gather herself. If she gave up now, she would let Ryan's betrayal define her, shape how others saw her, and extinguish the light she worked so hard to keep alive. Her vulnerability was raw, her heartbreak real, but beneath it, a stubborn flame of determination flickered quietly. It was the beginning of a fight she hadn't yet fully grasped, but one she knew she had to face alone. Slowly, between tears and frustration, she whispered to herself, "I won't be broken." If you ever find yourself doubting your strength after betrayal, remember Cassie's beginning. Sometimes the hardest battles start when the world seems to turn against you, but holding on is the first step to reclaiming your power. In the days that followed, Cassie's world seemed to narrow down to a painful loop of uncertainty and quiet desperation. She made a point to show up at work, to laugh at the right moments, and to avoid the eyes of coworkers who looked at her with pity or suspicion. Every text from Ryan remained unanswered. She refused to give him the satisfaction of knowing how much his actions fractured her inside. Instead, she turned to her phone and computer, searching for any clue, any piece of evidence that could help her make sense of what had happened and regain the control that slipped through her fingers. Her first attempts to access the joint bank account with a fresh perspective were met with frustration. Passwords she thought she knew no longer worked, and customer service calls only hinted that a withdrawal or transfer had been initiated by account holder Ryan alone. She felt fooled, betrayed by not only Ryan's words, but also the system that allowed such easy erasure of her financial security. But while she fumbled through the tangled web of online banking notifications and half-understood legal terms, small sparks of clarity started to emerge. Cassie began searching through old emails and messages she had overlooked, sorting through her phone for conversations that might mention payments or transfers she didn't remember. Bits and pieces started to fit together. the strange phone calls Ryan made late at night, references to meetings she'd asked about but that were always brushed off, a few unexplained transfers from their joint account flagged months earlier. She jotted down dates, made spreadsheets, and printed documents to keep everything tangible. What had seemed like a complete loss was starting to feel like the beginning of an investigation, but progress was slow and disheartening. There were moments when she felt completely powerless, like when a supposedly recovered document disappeared without a trace, or when phone calls to banks led nowhere, and her fatigue seemed to build. At the end of one exhausting day, Cassie sat on her apartment floor, staring at her scattered notes and empty bank statements, swallowing down the defeat threatening to overwhelm her. Why had she trusted so completely? Why hadn't she noticed the signs sooner? The tears she had kept hidden finally spilled over. It wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal, the humiliation, and the cold fact that a man she loved could discard her so easily. Still, nestled deep inside was a small flicker of hope. The day she stumbled upon a message from Ryan that hinted at a secret account made her sit upright with alarm and curiosity. It was a line in a conversation from months ago. Something like, "Don't worry about the extra funds. I'll sort that," followed by a smiling emoji she hadn't decoded at the time. The cryptic note suggested a path. Maybe Ryan hadn't covered his tracks as well as he thought. Armed with this faint lead, Cassie resolved to dig deeper, to keep uncovering the hidden truth step by step. Though the weight of her humiliation grounded her in moments of despair, it couldn't extinguish the resolve growing inside. If only she could find a way to turn the tables, to show Ryan, and everyone else who doubted her, that she was not a victim to be dismissed or forgotten. Every small discovery was a victory, she whispered to herself, a promise that this story wasn't over yet. Somewhere beneath the shadows of betrayal, Cassie felt the stirrings of a strength she hadn't yet fully met. Weeks passed, and the weight of betrayal pressed on Cassie like a relentless storm. What began as whispered doubts and subtle exclusions among friends and coworkers evolved into outright avoidance. Invitations stopped coming, friendly greetings turned to cold nods, and the once warm community around her seemed to dissolve. The isolation stung more than the empty bank account. It was as if her very existence was being erased alongside her savings. One evening, after a long day spent digging through endless digital records, Cassie received a message that cut deeper than any financial loss. A group chat from her closest friends lit up, but she wasn't included. Screenshots circulated, snippets of conversations where her name was mentioned with harsh judgment, casting blame as if she were responsible for everything that had gone wrong. Their disdain felt like knives twisting in her chest. Cassie's attempts to bridge the gap were met with silence or vague excuses. Ryan's name surfaced in spiteful gossip, but anyone who defended Cassie found themselves sidelined. The irony was brutal. While Ryan enjoyed the company of friends and smiled with effortless charm, she grappled alone with the wreckage of her reputation and her finances. His arrogance seemed impenetrable, like a high wall she couldn't scale. The cruelest moment came during a chance encounter at a cafe, where Ryan was surrounded by familiar faces, laughing openly. He caught sight of Cassie from across the room, his smile tightening. Approaching her, he spoke low, venom barely disguised. "Thought you'd have given up by now. You're wasting your energy." Humiliated, Cassie's voice faltered as she replied, "I'm not done." His smirk faltered for a moment, the first crack in his armor. That night, alone in her apartment, Cassie stared at the blank bank app on her phone. The numbers reflected the cold reality she faced. No access, no money, no safety net. But even in this abyss, a thought started forming. What if her humiliation wasn't the end, but a catalyst? If Ryan wanted her to be broken, he had underestimated her. Determination simmered beneath the surface, feeding on the injustice she endured. If she could not win back the money immediately, she would find another way to reclaim her life. The shame that once pinned her down now became a quiet fire, urging her to fight back, piece by piece. She picked up the phone and messaged Tom, a longtime friend and lawyer, someone she had always trusted. "I need help," she typed simply. It was the first step toward turning the tide. Life had pushed Cassie to her lowest point: empty pockets, shrinking friendships, and a heart bruised by betrayal. Yet even in this darkest hour, the seed of a new beginning took root. If you're feeling overwhelmed by the weight of unfairness or judgment, remember Cassie's story. Sometimes when we feel at our lowest, it's the universe's way of preparing us for a rise more powerful than we imagined. Hold tight. Your comeback begins when you decide you're not done yet. In the heavy silence that followed the confrontation at the office, Nadia sat alone at her kitchen table, the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders like an unbearable burden. The sharp sting of humiliation lingered in her mind, making it difficult to breathe or think clearly. She replayed the scene again and again: the sneering looks, the whispered comments, the way her colleagues had withdrawn support, as if she were tainted. It felt as though the entire world had turned against her, reducing her to a fragile shadow of herself. Yet amid the swirling storm of emotions, a faint flicker of resolve ignited within her heart. She refused to be defined by someone else's cruelty. Nadia's mind drifted back to an old mentor who once told her, "When the world doubts you, it's only because they haven't seen what you're truly made of." That memory gave her a tiny spark of hope, something she hadn't felt for a long time. If only she could find a way to channel her pain into strength. The following days were grueling. Nadia found herself navigating a maze of cold shoulders and whispered rumors that followed her like shadows. Simple tasks at work became monumental challenges, each step forward met with invisible barriers. The pride she once took in her work wavered as doubt crept in. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice urged her to hold on. One evening, after another exhausting day, Nadia decided to go for a walk to clear her mind. The crisp night air bitted her cheeks, and the city lights shimmered with a distant glow. But her thoughts were tangled in a restless knot. As she wandered, her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. It was a message from Mia, a colleague she barely knew but who had noticed her growing isolation. "Hey, I hope you're doing okay. If you ever want to talk or need anything, I'm here." Simple words, but they sent a wave of warmth through Nadia's heart. It reminded her she wasn't completely alone. Maybe there were people willing to see beyond the surface, to understand her struggles without judgment. The next morning, Nadia found herself scanning through old journals she'd kept during her college days. Pages filled with dreams, ambitions, and moments of joy she'd long forgotten. A passage caught her eye. "Strength is not the absence of fear, but the courage to stand even when you tremble." She clung to that thought like a lifeline. At work, despite lingering tensions, she started seeking small victories, completing tasks with care, offering genuine compliments to those who were kind, even if the circle was small. Each success, no matter how modest, became a brick in a foundation she was slowly rebuilding. However, lurking beneath her cautious optimism was the reality that the road to redemption was far from smooth. Her antagonists seemed to double down on their efforts to undermine her, spreading further untruths and subtle slights designed to keep her on the defensive. The stares in the hallway grew colder, the whispers more venomous. It was as if every attempt she made to rise was met with fresh ridicule. Despite the mounting pressure, Nadia found solace in moments of quiet reflection and the budding support from unexpected quarters. Friends who had appeared distant before now sent messages of encouragement. Strangers offered kind smiles that suggested empathy rather than disdain. And deep inside, a thought began to take root. A thought that maybe, just maybe, the storm she was enduring was the prelude to a different chapter. A chapter where her voice would no longer be silenced by cruelty, but uplifted by truth and resilience. If you ever feel crushed under the weight of injustice or humiliation, remember how the smallest flickers of hope can grow into powerful flames. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is hold on to those flickers, trusting they will guide us toward the light ahead. The unexpected message from Nia was just the beginning of a subtle yet powerful shift in Nadia's life. One afternoon, as Nadia was quietly organizing files at her desk, the office door creaked open and in walked Jennifer, the very colleague who had publicly mocked her just weeks before. Nadia's heart tightened, bracing herself for another wave of humiliation. But to her astonishment, Jennifer hesitated, then approached with a carefully measured calm. "I've been thinking," Jennifer began, avoiding direct eye contact. "Maybe things got out of hand. I wanted to apologize." Nadia blinked, uncertain if her ears had deceived her. The office, which once felt like a battleground, suddenly seemed quieter, almost fragile. Jennifer's confession stirred a whirlwind of emotions: shock, disbelief, and a cautious glimmer of hope. Yet it wasn't just Jennifer who was shifting. That same day, a shocking email surfaced, one that Nadia's main antagonist, a senior manager named Collins, had inadvertently sent to the entire department. The message exposed his carefully concealed motives, a campaign fueled by insecurity, jealousy, and fear of being overshadowed by Nadia's potential. The email detailed cynical attempts to sabotage her reputation and career progression, with disparaging comments about her character and professionalism. As the contents became known, the atmosphere in the office changed abruptly. Husbands and wives whispered behind closed doors. Conversations halted as eyes flickered toward Nadia, with newfound respect or guilt. The very people who had reveled in her downfall now grappled with the fact they had been manipulated, their cruelty rooted in misinformation. Watching Collins's face turn a livid red during the emergency meeting was a moment Nadia would never forget. For once, the power dynamics shifted, and the undeniable truth took center stage. Amid the tremors of this upheaval, Mia came alongside Nadia more openly, her kindness growing into a steady friendship. With her support and the unexpected unraveling of Collins's scheme, Nadia began to rebuild the fragile mosaic of her professional life. Yet the journey was far from over. The scars of betrayal and public humiliation were deep. Meanwhile, the office allies, who had once been silent bystanders, now cautiously approached Nadia, offering public apologies and gestures of solidarity. They were tentative, uncertain, recognizing the damage done and eager to make amends, though Nadia felt the need to navigate these interactions with care. For Nadia, this reversal was bittersweet. She had won a battle, but the conflict had unveiled wounds beneath the surface. Trust fractured, confidence shaken. Still, there was an undeniable sense of vindication and hope sewn into the fabric of her days. The revelation of Collins's deceit didn't just clear her name. It exposed a culture of fear and toxic rivalry that few dared confront. "Sometimes," Mia said quietly one afternoon as they sipped coffee in the small break room, "the bravest thing is not just standing up to your enemies, but forgiving the people who hurt you, even when they don't deserve it yet." Nadia listened, the weight of those words settling into her bones. She realized that true strength wasn't about revenge or retaliation, but about rising above bitterness and choosing grace. If you ever find yourself overwhelmed by betrayal or false accusations, consider this: the truth often has a way of coming to light in the most unexpected moments. And when it does, it creates opportunities, not just for justice, but for healing and courage that can change everything. Sometimes, the kindness of strangers and the unexpected sincerity of others can be the very thing that begins to mend a broken spirit. With Collins exposed and his web of deceit unraveled, the office began to open its eyes in a way Nadia had never imagined possible. The morning meetings, that once brimmed with whispered judgments, now carried an air of guarded respect, sometimes tinged with awkward apologies. Yet the true battle for Nadia wasn't simply about reclaiming her position. It was about healing the fractures left behind, both in herself and within the environment she'd been forced to endure. As weeks passed, Nadia found the courage to face those who had betrayed her, not with hostility, but with a resolute calm. the moment felt surreal when she stood in front of the team during a company-wide presentation and shared her vision for the project that had been overshadowed by conflict. Her voice was steady, her demeanor confident, and a spark that had been dimmed for so long now burned bright. Eyes that once dismissed her were locked in attentive silence. And for the first time, many saw the leader she always was beneath the layers of pain. Jennifer, now a tentative ally, volunteered to collaborate with Nadia on a crucial client presentation. Their work was meticulous, driven by a shared determination to prove that cooperation, not conflict, could yield success. When the project soared beyond all expectations, applause and genuine congratulations filled the room, a far cry from the cold indifference that had plagued Nadia's days. Even those who had once mocked her found themselves confronting their own regret. A few approached her privately, voicing remorse that surprised Nadia, touching on the humanity lost in petty rivalries. She listened, but chose forgiveness, refusing to anchor herself in past wounds. Yet not everyone welcomed Nadia's resurgence. Collins's influence continued to ripple, and though sidelined, he stirred quiet resistance among some colleagues still loyal to his shadow. But Nadia faced these challenges head-on, armed with the inner strength forged through hardship and the unwavering support she had cultivated. Her ethics, integrity, and perseverance became a beacon, inspiring others to confront injustice rather than hide from it. Outside of work, Nadia's life transformed as well. She reconnected with family and old friends, realizing that vulnerabilities shared were bridges to understanding rather than weaknesses to hide. Her personal growth mirrored the professional, each facet fueling the other. The climax of her journey came unexpectedly. A company-wide award recognizing resilience and leadership, presented to Nadia at a ceremony attended by the very people who had once doubted her. The standing ovation was more than applause. It was acknowledgement of courage rising from the depths of humiliation and injustice. As she accepted the award, Nadia's voice wavered with emotion. "This isn't just my achievement," she said, eyes scanning the crowd. "It's proof that no matter how deeply we fall or how loud the doubts around us, our truth and strength can shine through. I hope my journey reminds all of you to hold on to hope, to trust your worth, and to treat others with kindness, even when it's difficult." In that moment, the walls that had once confined her spirit crumbled, replaced by openness and possibility. Nadia had reclaimed not just her reputation, but her dignity and peace of mind. Remember this: standing up for yourself doesn't always require loud confrontation. Sometimes it's the quiet persistence and grace in adversity that lead to the most profound victories. When justice and strength meet kindness, the world has no choice but to listen and change. The unexpected message from Mia was just the beginning of a subtle yet powerful shift in Nadia's life. One afternoon, as Nadia was quietly organizing files at her desk, the office door creaked open, and in walked Jennifer, the very colleague who had publicly mocked her just weeks before. Nadia's heart tightened, bracing herself for another wave of humiliation. But to her astonishment, Jennifer hesitated, then approached with a carefully measured calm. "I've been thinking," Jennifer began, avoiding direct eye contact. "Maybe things got out of hand. I wanted to apologize." Nadia blinked, uncertain if her ears had deceived her. The office, which once felt like a battleground, suddenly seemed quieter, almost fragile. Jennifer's confession stirred a whirlwind of emotions: shock, disbelief, and a cautious glimmer of hope. Yet it wasn't just Jennifer who was shifting. That same day, a shocking email surfaced, one that Nadia's main antagonist, a senior manager named Collins, had inadvertently sent to the entire department. The message exposed his carefully concealed motives: a campaign fueled by insecurity, jealousy, and fear of being overshadowed by Nadia's potential. The email detailed cynical attempts to sabotage her reputation and career progression, with disparaging comments about her character and professionalism. As the contents became known, The atmosphere in the office changed abruptly. Husbands and wives whispered behind closed doors. Conversations halted as eyes flickered toward Nadia with newfound respect or guilt. The very people who had reveled in her downfall now grappled with the fact they had been manipulated, their cruelty rooted in misinformation. Watching Collins's face turn a livid red during the emergency meeting was a moment Nadia would never forget. For once, the power dynamics shifted, and the undeniable truth took center stage. Amid the tremors of this upheaval, Mia came alongside Nadia more openly, her kindness growing into a steady friendship. With her support and the unexpected unraveling of Collins's scheme, Nadia began to rebuild the fragile mosaic of her professional life. Yet the journey was far from over. The scars of betrayal and public humiliation were deep. Meanwhile, the office allies who had once been silent bystanders now cautiously approached Nadia, offering public apologies and gestures of solidarity. They were tentative, uncertain, recognizing the damage done and eager to make amends, though Nadia felt the need to navigate these interactions with care. For Nadia, this reversal was bittersweet. She had won a battle, but the conflict had unveiled wounds beneath the surface. Trust fractured, confidence shaken. Still, there was an undeniable sense of vindication and hope sewn into the fabric of her days. The revelation of Collins's deceit didn't just clear her name. It exposed a culture of fear and toxic rivalry that few dared confront. Sometimes, Mia said quietly, one afternoon as they sipped coffee in the small break room, the bravest thing is not just standing up to your enemies, but forgiving the people who hurt you, even when they don't deserve it yet. Nadia listened, the weight of those words settling into her bones. She realized that true strength wasn't about revenge or retaliation, but about rising above bitterness and choosing grace. If you ever find yourself overwhelmed by betrayal or false accusations, consider this. The truth often has a way of coming to light in the most unexpected moments. And when it does, it creates opportunities, not just for justice, but for healing and courage that can change everything. Sometimes, the kindness of strangers and the unexpected sincerity of others can be the very thing that begins to mend a broken spirit.